There we go. All right. Thank you.
All right. So we continue. So thank you all very much. And I will say, it will give you a little bit of a background. I'm going to go through a presentation tonight, pretty aggressive in the information and experience I'd like to share, but it was truly a collaboration with our graphics and social media, Vinny Fiorelli, and our lead trader and trading partner relations guy up in our Montreal office in Canada, Felipe Gardian, and my business partner, who's actually the founder of our co-op, co-founder of our co-op, and our CFO. So this was a collaboration, and honestly, it was a catch-up over long overdue catch-up on the state of fair trade, the state of coffee, especially after, as you all can imagine, a few tumultuous years. We've been very fortunate because of the women and men we work with who grow our coffee and their co-ops. So I'm really looking forward to presenting with you all. And like I said, it's a pretty aggressive agenda, some tough acts to follow. The last three presentations. So I believe you all are up to the task. So a couple things. This is actually part of my job responsibility as a fair trade advocate and as the guy who runs a fair trade organic coffee company. I'm on the board of our co-op. I run the governance committee. But the principles of fair trade specifically talk about us sharing the fair trade business approach with others to inform and hopefully inspire consumers to get to know this business model, and most importantly, why it's critical, the important role that it plays. And I will say, after doing this for about 20 years, going through the research and really trying to nail down what I want to talk about tonight, I feel more confident than ever that fair trade organic coffee, which we're going to talk a lot about, and the cooperative business model are quite viable and maybe one of the best solutions out there to help small scale coffee farmers emerge from the cycle of poverty, which we'll talk about. So 3 objectives tonight: to inform you all, to help you all understand fair trade and hopefully become inspired advocates, but also at a bare minimum to help you know a few things about coffee and how to make the best choice to support coffee farmers when you go to the store or order online. So before I go to the slideshow, I'll go in a second. There was a conversation. I was in Guatemala in 2019. I took one of our customers, a large wholesale customer up in Atlanta, down to Guatemala to meet with the farmer groups we work with there, where a lot of their coffee comes from. And I was driving through the mountains of Guatemala with the manager of a co-op called Manos Campesinas, which is a secondary co-op that coordinates and manages the work of primary coffee farmer co-ops, one of which, a Pecaform, we've been buying from for over 20 years. And I asked Carlos, and I said, is it possible for a small-scale coffee farmer to actually make a living, a sustainable living, and a decent livelihood? And he said it is, but here are the conditions. And this is what I'm trying to tackle tonight. Number 1, minimum amount of land. And we'll talk about how much land the average coffee farmer has, but it's the minimum amount of land is at least 4 to 5 hectares of coffee and cultivation. As we'll talk later, that most coffee farmers have about 1. Okay. 2, they need to produce coffee that is of value in the market. So it needs to be specialty grade, fair trade, organic coffee. That is what carries the most value in the market by and large. And they need to be part of a co-op, a well-managed co-op that can provide them with support and services to help to support their individual coffee businesses and get their coffee to market into the international market. So those were key factors that he told me about. Oh, and the coffee has to be organic, like I said, but organic is very critical. So with that being said, I'm going to share my screen. And I'll tell you, if there's any problem with sound or visuals, Ellen, can you just raise your hand or just let me know, please? Great.
Looks and sounds great, Tripp.
Great. So, just learning how to use this. Great. So I'm one of the co-owners and I'm the CEO of Cafe Campesino and Sweetwater Organic Coffee. We are green coffee bean importers, and I would say cooperative importers. The only one of our kind that we know of in the world. We'll talk about that. We're coffee roasters, and we're wholesalers, and we're online retailers. So we buy, import, and bring bags, large bags of green coffee beans to our roasteries, and we roast them and in single origins and blends, and we distribute them to wholesale accounts, mostly in the Southeast, independent coffee houses, restaurants, Sprouts, some Whole Foods, you name it. And we're online retailers. We've shipped all over the world, but primarily in the United States. So Cafe Campesino is the parent company. We were founded over 20 years ago. We're actually Georgia's first and only 100% fair trade organic coffee company. We're located here. Our headquarters and our Cafe Campesino roastery is located here in Americus, Georgia. We are about 9 miles east of Plains, Georgia, where President and Mrs. Carter live. They have been wonderful supporters. We've got a very small community. They've come to annual parties and really tried to support our work. They're just impressive people. Americus is also the home to Habitat for Humanity International, which is how I came down here in 1989, volunteer job as the PR coordinator for the 1990 Jimmy Carter Work Project. And it's where I met my business partners, Bill Harris, who founded this company and founded the co-op that I'm going to be talking about, and his brother Lee Harris, who's our roast master and a chef. So Bill's the visionary, the founder. Lee is the roaster, really wonderful touch in his roast profiles. And I came in early in the game as the guy who's supposed to run it and get things done. We are a good group of 3, but we also have about 10 community investors, people we've brought in with a little bit of a capital investment, preferred stock, so that we could purchase a new roaster purchase a new roaster, and helped us to purchase Sweetwater Organic Coffee that we acquired in 2008. And some of our staff members have ownership in the company. We're open books management. Third Thursday of every month, we go through the P&L with all of our staff members. The managers are being trained in top line to bottom line. And we're open book. And we like to share. When we do well, we like to share it with staff. Sweetwater, as I said, we acquired in 2008. It's in Gainesville, Florida. It makes Americus look cool. It's swampy and hot, but it's really a wonderful place. University of Florida, tons of great food, and Sweetwater is really the sustainable roaster for that town and for a big swath of Florida. We have about 18 employees between the 2 locations. And I asked Bill, our CFO, to tally up how many pounds we've purchased through our co-op under fair trade terms. And he came up with over 3.7 million pounds since 1998. And the point, I had dinner with him and my son last night, and the point that Bill made, and he said conservatively, he could back this up, that our business model has added about 50 cents per each of those pounds in additional payment to the farmer groups we bought from. And Bill is not casual with his finances. And I said, can you back it up? And he said, I can, but conservatively, the terms of trade that we have used through the co-op over the years have made a large contribution. That's not even including organic premium, fair trade premium, which is called the social premium, and other means of support. So we're also a certified B Corporation. Like I said, we're a member of Co-op Coffees, the Fair Trade Federation, which is the organization whose principles we use to keep us grounded properly in what fair trade is all about. Big supporters of Georgia Organics and Florida Organic Growers and the Specialty Coffee Association. Just so you know, each year we'll do about 160,000 pounds of green beans at each roastery. And here's the kicker. Our crack staff will roast 42 pounds at a time, essentially fresh roasted every week. So we have a very remarkable group of people from all over the world, from a Vietnam veteran to a DACA program individual, and everything in between. So we feel very fortunate, very fortunate. And our roaster at Sweetwater won't mind me saying this. He is a 72-year-old Vietnam vet, and he's one of the best roasters we've ever had. So arduous work. So moving through, so I've talked about our two roasting companies, and as I said, we're a member of Cooperative Coffees. And Cooperative Coffees, to the best of our knowledge, is the only green coffee importing cooperative of its kind. And as you can read here, since the beginning, over 20 years ago, committed to building and supporting fair and direct trade relationships for the benefit of small-scale coffee farmer families, their communities, and exporting cooperatives. We strive to promote transparent, fair trade and sustainable development alternatives in both the North and the South, while continuing to sell the highest quality coffee on the market. And quality is critical. You can't communicate the message of fair trade and the importance of organics if your coffee isn't tasty. And so we have a real responsibility. On top of that, we have a real responsibility to honor the farmers and do their coffee right. Co-op has 22 members at the current time in North America. So from the Bean North up in the Yukon, down to Sweetwater in Florida, over to Third Coast Coffee in Austin, Texas. We've got great members who are really committed, small to medium-sized roasters. The main office for the co-op is actually here in Americus. I think it's an office of 3 people who manage, I think it's over 150 containers a year of coffee coming in. So the Americus office, general management, importing, and logistics, and then our trading partner relations for our co-op and the quality lab are located up in Montreal, Canada. So, where does coffee grow? This is a point that I've often overlooked, as well as what a coffee plant looks like, and we'll get to that every time I talk with people about coffee. So coffee is grown, as it says here, basically between the tropics. There are about 50 core coffee growing countries in the world, up to 80, another 30 more do coffee, but 50 more or less are the core. I believe it's about 75% of coffee comes out of Latin America, Africa, and Asia Pacific. So those are the 3 primary regions. For us, it's basically everything from Mexico down to Bolivia, Colombia, and in between. In Africa, we focus primarily on Ethiopia, different regions of Ethiopia, and in Asia Pacific, it's primarily Sumatran coffee. In between the tropics is really the best zone for Arabica coffee, and we'll go through the different types of coffee in a few minutes. Arabica versus Robusta, but Arabica requires altitudes to about 900 meters and up. So this region provides that the altitudes necessary between 900 and 1500 meters and beyond are ideal conditions for growing coffee trees. Frost-free climate, averaging 60 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. Moderate rainfall of roughly 80 inches and abundant sunshine. Obviously, climate change, global warming is impacting coffee farmers. I would say kind of the easy one to point out is lack of reliability of rainfall and temperature variances and excessive temperatures are leading to fungus. It is a very good example of climate change impact on coffee. Fungus increasingly at higher altitudes that can wipe out, essentially defoliate the plants. So this is where coffee is grown. The other element of this region is that, and altitude, is that this means that coffee farmers, and we'll start talking about who coffee farmers are in this world, live at very high altitudes, very remote areas, often without best infrastructure, disconnected and isolated, and pretty much on their own in terms of running their coffee farms. And it's a true Herculean task to farm coffee and then to get it to market, especially if you think about how remote these coffee farms are throughout this region. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So moving to the most important part of all of this are the women and men who grow our coffee. So what you see here are images of people who are members of the trading partner, the farmer-owned cooperatives that we work with. And I think you will see smiles, health, vitality, lush green. And these are small-scale coffee farmers in the sense of the global population of coffee farmers, but these are farmers who, through their co-op and through their growing savvy and farming coffee, are pulling ahead and stabilizing how they live and creating a sustainable livelihood. But that's really kind of the big issue at hand. So about 80% of the world's coffee is grown by 25 million small landholder coffee farmers. And that's kind of the rub, living at below or subsistence. There are about another 100 million family members and seasonal laborers who depend on the income of those 25 million small landholders to live. And if you look at the average cultivation of a small-scale coffee farmer, according to the data that I've found and verified, the average landholding is about 1 hectarea, and the average yield is about 5 60-kilo bags of coffee per year. So that's about 660 pounds. And if they're making on average, let's say anywhere from 50 cents to 90 cents a pound, 90 cents would be fortunate, they're not deriving a lot of income. Coffee prices are critical. We're going to talk about it. But the other critical factor that I've mentioned a couple of times is they need to get more land. They need to have more land under cultivation. Now, a lot of these coffee farmers, not a lot, but an increasing population is learning to farm their own land for food security. But that is at cross purposes with some of the coffees, with the main coffee that is grown, that is conventional and uses pesticides, because then you have the problem of soil depletion. So in reality, most of the world's coffee farmers are caught in a cycle of poverty, subsistence at best. For a lot of these coffee farmers, it's the only thing they've known. It's the only thing they know how to do. It was passed down from generation to generation. However, in the 60s, huge infusion of the agricultural companies providing very easy access to pesticides and fertilizers. And as you can imagine, when they're offered to you, you use them to increase yields, but you're ultimately depleting your soil. So you've got that pressure on them. They have no access to resources generally, no capital, no training, no support. And the coffee that they're producing is not high value coffee, it's commodity coffee. And then on top of that, the coffee market is very volatile, it's very complex, and pricing, the baseline of pricing is based on the New York C, which is basically the coffee futures market. And it is, my business partner, like I said, is very savvy with numbers and financially, and I watched him walk out of a futures and New York C trading seminar, week-long training seminar, and mystified and perplexed and humbled by the experience. It's very complicated. So most of the world's coffee farmers are the smallest fish in the supply chain, and they are simply stuck in poverty. And our goal is to help change that. And our hope is that more coffee farmers will move into farmer-owned cooperatives and leverage all the benefits that we'll go through. So coffee farming is very intensive in a nutshell. because we've got a lot to cover and I want to leave time for questions. Here on the left, you see a coffee plant. I believe that this farmer is from one of our co-ops in Guatemala or Mexico. It's a little bit of an old photo, but it's the most realistic, one of the more realistic images of a coffee plant. Coffee is essentially 2 coffee beans inside of a cherry. And in slide 2, they're depulping the cherries, but basically 2 coffee beans inside a cherry, and coffee farmers will have a strong coffee farmer in a co-op will have probably about 1,500 plants in a hectarea, right? So they're hand picking. They have to hand pick 2,000 cherries that are ripening at different times, so they can't strip them off. They're hand picking 2,000 cherries to get a yield of 1 export pound of coffee. Is very, very general rule of thumb. So it's super labor intensive. That in and of itself. So coffee farmers will be up in terms of harvest season. Off season, they're managing their land, and if they're organic farmers, they're putting an immense amount of effort into terracing and composting and shade management. But all coffee farmers have to work their land off season to get ready for harvest season. But basically, coffees are picked and they're put into a big canasta, a big basket of about 100 pounds. They're taken to a depulper, which is the second image there, where the coffee beans are separated from the mucous membrane and the skin. The mucous membrane and skin for really well-run coffee farms are used for composting, right? But then the coffee beans in the washed method, there's a semi-washed and unwashed that we're not going to talk about because most of the world's coffee is washed. The beans will go into a fermentation tank, which is the third image there, and they'll ferment depending on altitude, humidity, when the fermentation is being done to basically unpeg the goo is the only way I can describe it, to separate the mucous membrane from the coffee beans. Then the coffee beans are washed through a series of canals, and the farmers in well-run coffee co-ops actually will take the canals, and the water that is generated is called agua dulce, and it can be toxic to the soil. And so a traditional farmer, if she or he is depulping and fermenting on their property, likely is not doing the well system that is needed to filter the agua dulce before it goes into the surrounding land. But co-ops provide a lot of technical support and help farmers set up these wells and these systems essentially that filter the agua dulce water before it goes back into the soil. Very labor intensive. Then begins the process of drying and selecting defects. The image on the right, beans are laid out, spread, dried. If it rains, they get gathered up and covered. End of the day, and when the rain is over, they get put back out and raked and dried. And then at night, they're gathered up, and it's a process of drying down to about 12 to 13% humidity before they can be taken. So it's extremely labor intensive, and the hand sorting that goes on at this level on all farms is painstaking. We good so far? All right. So I've never put this chart up before in a presentation, but I grabbed this chart which shows you since 1969 coffee prices. And can you see my hand right here is where we are right now. You will see over the past 50 plus years, maybe a few spikes, several spikes where prices go up to, as you can see, the price per pound on the left side. But by and large, coffee farmer prices live right about here. Just looking at this diagram. So the first things, just repeating, coffee prices are volatile. Coffee farmers have to manage price and risk management day in, day out because coffee prices are changing daily when it comes to harvest time. Co-ops particularly have to pay attention and manage to the New York Sea because they've got to manage price for their members. They've got to minimize risk and exposure for their members, but they've also got to keep the price that they're going to pay to their members sufficiently high so that their members don't take advantage of what might be a one-time high price offering in the local market to a high paying multinational or local broker who might offer them a higher price in the one time to grab their coffee. So there's a lot of pressure and it's extremely complex. So in other words, if a co-op is managing 700 members and the co-op doesn't maintain pricing to their farmers to pay them, and the market spikes very high, there are some members, if they have an opportunity to have a little bit of a cash windfall, are going to take it. When you're living, at subsistence level or really trying to improve your lot in life, there are temptations, and that's maybe one of the hardest jobs of a co-op is to keep their members, keep offering them best prices possible, and to keep them delivering their coffee and sustaining the co-op, which is the best long-term bet. Independent coffee farmers, the vast majority, don't have those services. They simply go down to the road when the coyote is ready. Coyote will have not a bad person, will just have a scale on the back of the truck. Coffee farmer will take her or his 6 bags. They'll get offered the cash price for the day, and they'll basically have to take it. So I have here, however, there is an important and growing group of coffee farmers who are emerging from the commodity cycle. These are farmers who farm specialty grade Arabica, organic coffee, and who are members, and by virtue of being members, owners of a fair trade cooperative. So before we go into the specifics of the cooperatives and fair trade, I just want to go through the basic categories of coffee so everybody's crystal clear. Arabica versus Robusta. I talked about it earlier. Arabica is really the coffee that is considered the top coffee in the world for flavor profile, overall quality of the bean, and really getting flavor profiles that consumers are demanding. Commodity versus specialty grade. The vast majority of those 25 million coffee farmers are producing conventional, you see below, versus organic, so non-organic commodity coffee, versus specialty grade. Specialty grade is a coffee on a scale of basically 1 to 100. It's coffee that's been graded by a professional called a Q grader who gives it a score of 80 to 100. And that's considered specialty grade. And that means it's free of primary types of defects and secondary types of defects. There are standards and qualifications for it. So specialty grade is the only coffee we buy because it's the only way we can be competitive in the marketplace. But it's also the coffee that, if farmed properly, is really the best value for farmers to put their time into. Just real quick, so you all can get an idea of where we are. We don't joke. We say that we're coffee for the 99%. So coffee scoring, let me give you kind of the different categories of coffee scores. So coffee scoring from 90 to 100 is graded outstanding. Coffee that scores 85 to 89.99 is graded excellent, while coffee scoring 80 to 84.99 is graded very good. We're the very good types of people because that's where most small scale farmers live. You will see really boutique roasters getting the best of the best, and that's cool. We just feel like we want to make the biggest contribution to the farmer co-ops we buy from, and we also feel that given the work they do on their end with our roasting and our dedication, we should be able to do plenty with a coffee that scores over 80. And after 20 years, it seems like it works. Then conventional versus organic, and shade grown with an asterisk. So conventional versus organic. Organic is maybe 5 to 6% of production. The most important thing I can convey to you, and when you go to a store, this is the first thing you can do to really help coffee farmers and the world. Organic coffee is not so important to us in the States because by the time it gets here, it's been roasted for 15 to 16 minutes at 400 degrees. The real issue about organic coffee starts where the farmers live. Number one, if they're not if they're doing conventional coffee, they are storing pesticides and fertilizers usually in their homes or right outside. And we're talking homes that are 1 or 2 bedrooms where everybody sleeps and eats. Number two, if pesticides and fertilizers are being applied at altitude, at steep inclines, when it rains and even when it's just dewy, you have runoff into the soil and into the water supply and into the soil where food may be being farmed. And third, the biggest thing, apart from those 2 items, is that conventionally, the use of pesticides and fertilizers simply depletes the soil. And the soil is the farmer's biggest resource. So I've been to Colombia, Nicaragua, and I'm learning a lot about soil science and how critical it is to the work that the co-ops are doing and coffee researchers, making sure that soil is kept in biodynamic balance, which not only provides for a happier, healthy coffee plant, but also provides for a good environment for farmers to grow other crops and to grow foodstuffs for them to live on. So big supporter of organic for those reasons. So the asterisk is a Karen Sue sidebar who asked me about a week ago if I was going to say anything about the birds. And we have quite a few bird folks in our Sangha, and it's always great to hear the conversations. And I'm not extremely well versed in the science of birds, but I'm going to read to you what the Smithsonian's National Zoo and Conservation Biology Institute stated. In study after study, habitat on shade-grown coffee farms outshone sun-grown coffee farms with increased numbers and species of birds, improved bird habitat, soil protection, erosion control, carbon sequestration, natural pest control, and improved pollination. And it goes on. But bottom line is, or coffee in general prefers to be shade grown, and organic coffee requires it. So if you're buying organic, you are buying organic coffee. I mean, you're buying shade grown coffee. There are bird friendly certifications. The Smithsonian one in particular, we don't ask that of our trading partners because they have an immense load to carry with their organic certification and fair trade certification and managing their co-ops. But there are certified bird-friendly coffees, as you all know. But we consider, shade-grown, bird-friendly to be and organic to be one and the same based on our experience. So now that we've just, established, hopefully, back to Carlos's comment, land, 5 hectares, certified organic, specialty grade Arabica. Those are the coffees that can provide for a sustainable, the coffees and the factor that can provide for a sustainable coffee business for the coffee farmers. The key element that Carlos added was a well-run, farmer-owned cooperative. So we rely on, in general, the thrust of fair trade, and there are many different ways, there are many different approaches to fair trade. There are criticisms, there are accolades. Bottom line is we and I believe that there are 2 components to proper fair trade. There are the principles that should drive the farmer group's behaviors, the traders' behaviors, and our behaviors as a roaster. And then there are the practices. And you do need to have accountability, especially for the farmer-owned cooperatives and the traders to ensure that the terms are being upheld, that the flow of money is transparent and accounted for, and that the farmers are getting paid what they're supposed to be paid, and that the funds that are paid to their co-op as part of the fair trade organic model are being deployed properly. One example is the social premium that gets included in the pricing, that it's being used by a farmer community, a farmer co-op properly in that community. So you do need verification. So we start with the principles. It's really about democracy, democratic ownership by coffee farmers in their cooperative, that they have a voice, that they have expanded opportunities, and an equitable approach to their coffee business. Fair pricing in terms of trade. Um, uh, and like I said, though, principles are the start. It needs to be backed up by standards and practices. So this is probably where it's going to get a little bit confusing, but you can ask your questions when we're done. So in a nutshell, Fair Trade International, or FLOW, is the European-based certification body it's the primary certification body that verifies that farmer-owned cooperatives, it provides principles and standards and does annual inspection of small-scale farmer co-ops, as well as traders like our co-op, Cooperative Coffees, to ensure that fair trade standards are being met. I'm going to leave it at that and just let questions happen. But it's very important that that practices on the ground and the exchange of coffee be verified to make sure that the minimum price, the price of the contract, and all the other elements of a fair trade relationship are being honored. There's a small producer symbol, which is an alternative for small-scale farmer co-ops who cannot afford FLOW. And what's interesting, it's the first fair trade farmer-owned certification system that emerged out of Latin America. It's owned by small farmer cooperatives. It's the only fair trade certification that is owned by small farmer cooperatives, and the only fair trade certification that focuses solely on commodities produced by small farmer co-ops. For us, if a farmer co-op is FLOW certified, that's easy because our co-op is also FLOW certified. But if a farmer group says we can't afford FLOW, but we're SPP, we will gladly honor that as a co-op and certainly as a roaster. So just here to the crop side of how a co-op works, just to make sure everybody understands. Let me just see something here. Okay, I want to go back up here. Okay, I think I missed this slide earlier, but we'll use this one instead. So an individual farmer, the minimum amount of coffee that you need to have in order to sell into the international market is about 250 to 280 bags in a container. An individual farmer not in a co-op, like I said, has to go down to where the coyote will meet her or him to pay them on the spot. But if you get 500, 600, 370 farmers together who can put together, aggregate their supply of at least 250 bags, all of a sudden they can fill that container, and that co-op's management team can sell into the international market. And we're going to go through very quickly everything that a co-op does. And just to confirm with you all, or just to kind of repeat and hopefully illustrate a little more clearly, we, Cafe Campesino, a roaster here, we can't buy that container if we want to buy from 12 other countries. But when we join forces with the 21 other roasters of co-op coffees and aggregate our demand, all of a sudden, the farmer-owned co-op and the roaster-owned co-op can trade directly, which gives us an opportunity to really know each other, establish long-term trading relationships, and really implement fair trade as it was meant to be. FLOW in particular really does focus, and the SPP, as I said, really focus on small-scale farmer co-ops, farmer producer organizations, solidarity as the building unit. And I believe that they are. In fact, I believe that they are, by and large, some of the best engines of development that I've encountered in my 20 years. So going back out, see if I can start to wrap up. So did some research. There are actually 835,000 coffee farmers represented by 636 producer organizations in the fair trade system across the world. As Carlos said, and as we've discovered, well-run cooperatives play a critical role in the lives of their members, their families, and their communities. Felipe up in Montreal said that co-ops first and foremost are a value-added price aggregator. In other words, The farmer-owned co-ops have very savvy management teams from their regions, people who are really committed to the farmers and to fair trade, who aggregate the farmer's supply of coffee, and as I discussed earlier, manage pricing, manage mitigate risk, and handle international sales to other importers, including cooperative coffees, our importing cooperative. Co-ops also can, because of their setup, our contracts with a co-op serve as collateral for those co-ops to go to financiers in the market for coffee to get pre-financing so that they can float cash in off-season and help sustain basically subsistence needs of their members in the off-season. Farmer-owned co-ops also provide the infrastructure necessary for organic certification. A little farmer on 1 hectarea with 6 bags of coffee isn't going to be able to get it. Remember, those are the majority of coffee farmers out there. On top of that, fair trade affords a 20-cent social premium that I mentioned that goes into a special fund that is used for everything from improving crop yields to leadership development to infrastructure in these communities. It's a real contribution, and at 3.7 million pounds times, I think the social premium used to be 15 cents, but that's a fair chunk of money going to each co-op with each container that is earmarked specifically for community development. On top of that, these organizations have a myriad of quality of life initiatives. In Peru and the Central Amazon, where I've been a few times, one of the most fascinating programs was a retirement program. Pangoa in the Central Amazon had a very aging population who were going to lose their ability to farm coffee. So they created essentially a retirement program where the farmers would plant hardwood, native hardwood trees that would contribute shade grown in their final years of farming, shade for their coffee fields. And then when they retired, they would start to harvest the trees and sell it to the local mill for funds to help fund their retirement. Animal husbandry, microloans, microfinance, all kinds of programs come out of cooperatives that small-scale farmers on their own simply don't have access to. And then the big one is land acquisition. In Peru, at that Pangoa cooperative, the average size of the coffee farm is about 6 hectares, which is great, which is very unusual. We know that 4 or 5 is about the minimum for a farmer to really build a sustainable business. But if you go to Guatemala, there are still co-op members, many, who are still at the 1, 2, 3 hectare level. So there's still work to do. That's another critical role of farmer-owned co-ops, is to help their members secure access to land and title to land, which has been a big issue. So I'm about to wrap up. There's tons more, but I think we're going to have to bypass it. So I wanted to be able to show, I've been wanting for 20 years to be able to show what a co-op farmer would get compared to an independent farmer per pound. Can you all, is this screen big enough for people to see? Ellen, is it visible? Okay.
Yes, it looks great. Excellent.
Okay. So in a nutshell, here on the left is CEC Pango, which is an actual contract I analyzed. This is the co-op of about 700 people in the Central Amazon. And the contract was executed, and I'm not going to get into the details, but essentially they landed on a price that met their terms, Pangoa's terms, and this is a price to our co-op of $2.71, okay? And that was based on the close of the New York C, based on the terms of the contract, plus a differential. A differential in this case includes 3 cents for a plastic bag called a Grain Pro, which goes inside the burlap to protect the coffee, social premium of 20 cents, and an organic premium of 40 cents. This is really for illustrating purposes, but bottom line is, on average, the co-op would probably take about 37 cents for overhead, and the farmer should wind up with about $1.77 in this scenario, more or less, per pound. Compare that to the indie farmer, where there is no differential. So the market closed at $2.08. There's no differential. There's no Grain Pro bag. There's no social premium. There's no organic premium. So in a low market, the farmer might be getting about 83 cents, and low market is where the coffee market tends to live. Right now, we're in a little bit of a spike. However, in a high market, they might get pretty close. But 80 to 90% of the time, they're living in a low market. So the producers at Pangoa are getting a better price considerably. They're getting benefits of how the social premium is used. All of the other elements that I've just discussed, which are the benefits of being in a farmer-owned co-op, compared to the small-scale coffee farmer who is simply going to have to take cash on the spot. So again, just back to our model. I'll close with this. Our co-op, Cafe Campesino in Sweetwater, we pay our co-op that $2.71 that you just saw. Cafe Campesino will then pay the co-op $2.71 plus about a 35-cent per pound management fee, plus our co-op aims to net about 5 cents per pound. So Cafe Campesino, will pay, a little bit over $3 for that pound, plus whatever it takes to bring it down from New Jersey. Which is fine with us, and we have price levels based on how long the inventory stays in the warehouse in New Jersey. But along with the benefits of our co-op on our side at Cooperative Coffees, just go through them very quickly. We are able to experience long-term direct relationships. We have a co-op staff, Cooperative Coffees, our co-op staff that uses a fair collaborative pricing approach. We know that farmers they have a good high minimum. Our minimum is $2.20. I believe that the fair trade minimum outside the standard fair trade minimum, I believe, is $1.70, maybe $1.90. Our co-op is working with the farmer organizations. Farmer organizations will choose if it's a fixed or a flexible contract. We don't tell them that it has to be fixed. We pay them promptly. We support them with pre-financing. And then I think the cool thing is we also pay 3 cents per pound to go into our co-op's impact committee. And our impact committee works with the small scale farmer groups to collaborate on projects that will benefit the farmer organizations we work with. Everything from sending money down for COVID relief is what funds were used from our impact fund, leadership development. But the cool one I'll tell you about is the one that I got to experience back in 2017. It's called the Cool Farms Tool. And I went down to Guatemala to sit with farmer co-op managers and members of our co-op to learn about this tool called the Cool Farms Tool, which large corporations generously made available to us. And what it does is it uses a web-based platform for farmers to input a load of data to basically assess and measure their carbon footprint. And what's really interesting is it's on the verge of becoming a tool that the farmer groups would like to use. In all of our heads, what we're thinking is, well, the evidence is showing that well-run organic coffee farms, especially among our group of fair trade co-ops, are actually net sequesterers of carbon. And so the logical place to go then is, shouldn't we roll into the contract or in some way, shape, or form compensate them for the carbon they're sequestering on our behalf? And I think that's just a very, very a powerful example of working together from basically the crop to cup by getting roaster importer together with farmers and their co-ops to collaborate on changing the way that coffee is traded, changing the way that coffee is brought to market, and hopefully having an impact on the lives of small-scale coffee farmers. And with 835,000 farmers, plus let's say another 3 million family members, 2.5, 3 million family members and laborers, out of the 125 million, it's small, but it's not that small, and it's growing, and it's a sustainable solution. We've been doing this for over 20 years, and so we're very optimistic. However, when you go to the store and you're going to look for coffee, I would think that certified organic would be strongly encouraged for the reasons I've stated. I would look for roasters who are committed to fair trade. in terms of acknowledging and identifying that they buy their coffee from small-scale farmer cooperatives. And I would think that coffee roasters would be a member of the Fair Trade Federation or would work with Fair Trade America, which is affiliated with the flow that I discussed earlier. There's another entity that is Fair Trade USA, which is a little bit of a different approach. It's more of an institutional minimal standards approach, but you really need to know your roasters. And there are 22 in our cooperative. There's also Equal Exchange, which is a competitor of ours, but they're an employee-owned cooperative. They do great work. They've been pioneers. And there are several other roasters who I think are really committed. So yeah, I think that's what I wanted to share with you all. And I hope it wasn't overly confusing. I get confused all the time, which is why it's been an interesting 3 weeks pulling this all together. So thank you.
Tripp, thank you so much. That was fantastic, fascinating, educational, and what a great amount of work you did pulling this all together.
Well, thank you.
I'm sure people must have some questions.
Thank you, Tripp.
My pleasure. Can we go to multi-screen view?
That's
Hi,
something
Miriam.
you have to change. I just took the spotlight off of you. Miriam has something.
Yeah, my question is, where does Starbucks get their coffee?
Starbucks is complicated. A lot of people like to hate them. I don't. Starbucks, where I've seen Starbucks at origin, and Nicaragua is the one clearly identifiable place that I saw them down in Nicaragua. What Starbucks did is they went into a community in Nicaragua, a coffee farming community, and connected with them, I think in a really, in a very genuine, authentic way, and connected with a farming community in a region because you want coffee to be roughly in the same region. I don't know if it was a cooperative. I actually think it was a region organized directly with local groups, local commercial groups, and they commit quite a bit to those communities while they're there. You see the plaques, you see contributions they've made to depulping infrastructure, drying infrastructure, but they'll go to regional groups of farmers and invest in productive capacity. The thing about, Starbucks poses a little bit of an interesting challenge that I've wrestled with for 20 years. They buy some of their coffee fairly, which if you stop and think about it, how do they buy the other coffee? You could say not fairly, right? And that is an issue, and that is my frustration. We have a farmer group up in Chajul in the north of Guatemala, where the scorched earth policy during the Civil War in Guatemala was hardest. And it's called a Chajulense, and they're really amazing people, one of our first trading partners. And they could have 30 to 35 containers in a year of coffee, but they can only sell 10 or 11 of them at fair trade prices. So it's a real issue. Starbucks' biggest issue is milk prices, brick and mortar, the challenges they're facing. I wouldn't call them the problem, but I would say that 100% commitment to fair trade minimum prices could be a good step in the right direction. But there are far more egregious players out there who are large multinational. I can't remember the acronym for it, is buying up a lot of roasters in the United States. And what they're trying to do is aggregate their roaster portfolio and then going to origin to do kind of that same, identifying regional groups of farmers and secure them and lock them into being their supplier. But they're also trying to introduce things like terms. So essentially getting those producer groups to offer them terms to pay based on their multinational footprint of coffee roasters. And it's just really complex and really difficult. So, which is why we really stick with transparent, democratically owned farmer co-ops. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, because now I'm gonna start to be a little more discriminating in my purchases.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Thanks, Tripp.
Thanks, Miriam. I have to admit, I do go to Starbucks in a pinch. I think they provide a lot. They create a lot of jobs. I mean, nothing is all good or all bad. Sue, Michael.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I really enjoyed it, and it really sounds like what you're doing is a good definition of right livelihood. The question I have is, how easy is it for farmers to join these co-ops, or are there barriers to joining co-ops? How does that work?
So based on my exposure, um, it depends. I mean, I don't mean that in a light way. It really the financial it's a delicate balance, and let me see if I can formulate. We have this conversation about bringing on new members. Let me put it this way: coffee farmer co-ops need members, and they need members who are going to participate in the life of the co-op.
Mhm.
These co-ops are very engaged at a grassroots level. So generally the cost and the entry requirements are modest and manageable. The work goes in, though, to screening coffee farmers to make sure when they come in, they're not coming in at a time when they're either in dire need or there's a benefit of the co-op of a co-op service that they need. So the co-op's primary objective is to maintain its members and to get their members participating, obviously, in the governance and the myriad programs that the co-op operates. New members come in under a fair amount of scrutiny because organic certification and in some regions, the problem of coca production. These co-ops have to be very careful. So they're constantly needing and would like to bring in more members. The pricing, the cost to get in is manageable, but there are quality standards. There are verifiability needs that have to be met for the co-op to protect the other members.
Thank you.
Thanks. John.
Thanks for the terrific talk. Can you, I have a couple of questions. First is, can you say what fair trade actually is? Is that possible?
Yeah, and it was my pain point because there are so many rabbit holes. But we'll start with the general and go to the specific. So the general is fair trade really emerged. The concept emerged in the 1800s, but it was the idea of fair trade labeling and the farmer-owned co-op really took root when the International Coffee Agreement collapsed in 1989 and prices were out of control, and Europe and coffee farmers in Mexico were looking for a solution. Okay, so in the simplest form, fair trade conceptually is about leveling the volatility and low prices, in this case for coffee, and acknowledging that small scale coffee farmers are at the mercy of the market and bearing a disproportionate burden compared to the overall size and opportunity in the market that people are cashing in on. So fair trade is designed to address that, and it's designed to incorporate small scale farmers to have a voice in their own livelihood and pricing. Because remember, pricing is determined at the New York C. It has nothing to do with their cost of production, let alone what they need to earn in order to cover their costs, pay for food, and maybe put a little bit of money away. So the method that seems to work the best is a fair trade principles of farmers joining and having an active role and ownership in their farmer-owned cooperative, and using what I call kind of a socioeconomic or a social economy of scale, because when you aggregate your demand as a small scale farmer group, you can fill that container. You can sell into the international market. But fair trade are the principles which lie at the heart of being able to commercialize that coffee in terms that are fair and beneficial to coffee farmers. So you move from fair trade is very complicated, and I hope I'm not confusing you further, but start with principles of leveling the field, giving coffee farmers a voice, relying on the co-op model where farmers are in solidarity working together, and then build on to that management systems that I described earlier, where the coffee is aggregated professionally for the farmers by their management team, and they have access to the benefits of social premium, of technical support for organic certification techniques, as well as the actual organic certification. So you take that, and then you move to the people who are buying coffee. People like Cooperative Coffees under fair trade are agreeing to a minimum, to letting the farmer groups determine if a contract is going to be fixed or open, to paying the social premium, to basically coming to a price in a collaborative manner, and to paying promptly. Then you keep moving through the chain, right, from crop to cup. Then you go to the roaster. And the roaster, for us, our fair tradedness, the coffee's already been certified at the coffee level. It's already been certified fair trade at the cooperative importer level. So we don't believe in paying a certification, a fair trade certification at our level. Actually, what we believe in is abiding via our membership in the Fair Trade Federation and the Code of Practices to supporting our co-op and the small scale farmer co-ops per the fair trade principles and practices, making sure our co-op is buying the coffee properly, and then doing our best to kind of parity with the coffee farmers, making sure that we manage our own companies and have and are willing and transparent to share our business practices to third party that show that we are conforming to standards of treating people properly. So that's why we're a certified B Corp. It's why we go through an audit every year of verification with the Fair Trade Federation about our trading practices, and then a certified B Corp to make start to finish to make sure that we are serving all of the stakeholders in our chain sustainably and ethically, and not just for the sake of profit. So yeah, it's complex, John. It's very, but bottom line is direct, long-term trading relationships based on fairness and equity and based on transparency, and making sure that farmers have a voice and ownership in their coffee businesses and aren't just anonymous indie farmers who are at the mercy of the day's price and coyotes.
I'll put my other question on hold, and because there may be other people. Nope. Then I'll ask my other question.
Okay.
I don't know if this still holds, but I remember years ago I learned that there were 3 levels of coffee suppliers. The first level was the level of Folgers, A&P, private label, King Supers, that kind of stuff. Second level was an improvement up was Starbucks Pete's, that level. And then the third level was the emerging at that time, 20 years ago or more, level of specialty coffee roasters like you. And things like, I think one of the first ones, I can't remember the name of it, was in the Pacific Northwest, you probably know. And then there was Intelligentsia out of Chicago. Mm-hmm. Right. Today, where do people like King Supers or Trader Joe's, where do they get their coffee? Are they, and what level are they getting it at? What's their relationship to what you've been describing?
I do not know. I've never had Trader Joe's coffee, but first of all, your categories basically still hold, right? Okay, so you've got your commodity coffee, which is, chock full of nuts. That's the coffee that is being aggregated by a local aggregator in coffee country, and a gross quality review, but it's being roasted fairly dark to hide defects, and it's a commodity based coffee. Then you move up to the Starbucks, and like you said, and that is specialty grade coffee, and that remains the same, not necessarily organic, and in fact, often not organic, right? Then you move to, and the market data says that the market for properly sourced certified coffees is actually, I think, one of the largest growth segments. So you move to people like us, counterculture, people who are trying to rise and do trade directly, right? And then you have more. I think the only addition to that group is what are kind of called third wave roasters, who are kind of the boutique roasters, who are getting really good specialty grade coffee, may or may not be organic, but are buying it probably at a decent price and selling it at a super premium. And I kind of lost the train of your question. I was thinking through the categories.
I was interested to know where the sources that provide the most coffee, like the supermarkets, they're selling private label under their own labels.
A lot of
King's
that's
Coffee not
commodity
making
coffee,
any-
John.
Huh?
A lot of that's the commodity coffee that is part of the problem. I mean, I think about my dad scoring a 5-pound can of coffee for like $3 and coming home victorious, and now I understand what that meant. So if you think about it, John, picking 2,000 coffee cherries to get 1 pound of export grade coffee, a 5-pounder at $3-4, kind of speaks for itself. But to your question, a lot of that is the commodity coffee, and in my opinion, part of the problem. Hey, Barry.
I have a question. You mentioned several times green beans. What does that mean?
So in the coffee process, remember they're picking cherries, and then inside there are 2 coffee beans that are wrapped up in mucous membrane, right? They get depulped, and then they get fermented, and those are the green. Well, at that point they're not totally green; they're called parchment. But then they get dried, they get sorted, and then they get processed for export, and those are the green coffee beans, green beans, not the vegetable.
Okay, so it just means that they're not yet roasted.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. Sorry if I didn't make that clear, but yeah, green coffee beans, the raw material.
Does
All
it
right.
matter how long there is a time between that stage and when they are roasted?
Yeah, but it's pretty long. So we still have crop year 2000, probably end of 2020, 2021 here. If you go much longer, and we don't have a lot, like it's really, we're rolling into, we should be deeply into crop year 2021, 2022. But basically what happens is they'll lose their moisture. They'll go from 12% moisture down to 7, 8, 9. You just got to roast them very differently, very dark, because they'll be dried out. So you got to rotate them. And in our co-op, so we commit 6 months in advance, roughly. We commit before harvest with all the other 21 roasters to how much coffee we're going to buy in the next crop season. And we sign a contract with our co-op. And so we are legally obligated to buy coffee that we are not sure if we're going to be able to sell. So we commit every year to 10% growth over the last year and hope that we can sell it. But that contract is used by our co-op to go to our bank and serve as collateral for the line of credit we use to make sure that we pay the farmers on time. So another element of what we do. The 2 biggest stakeholders and risk takers are the farmers and their co-ops and the roasters and our co-op. Importers are also just standard importers are just huge risk takers. They're very, I mean, they're very vulnerable to risk because they're buying a lot of coffee and have to sell it. In our case, we've got 22 roasters who have committed to buy that coffee, so at least our co-op is safe.
I remember the name of that third wave roastery I was trying to think of, Stumptown.
Stumptown was sold, I believe, John, to the big multinational. I was the problematic multinational.
Yeah, it was sold. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, Belgian. I think it's
Yeah,
Jab.
Yeah, and I think Intelligentsia was sold too.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is, if you go to cooperativecoffees.com website, you'll see 22 great roasters, and it's still worth researching. I mean, you got to like the coffee that people roast. But I think if I were to kind of recommend roasters to look at, it's certainly the members of our co-op. It's equal exchange. And then there's like a second tier of roasters who I understand are doing pretty good work, who may not be fair trade, like Counterculture, pays well from some of the same farmer groups we work with. But those are the folks I would aim towards. Miriam.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm a coffee lover myself, and I have a distinct preference for dark roasts. Now, do you guys roast different, produce different roasts? And if so, what's your favorite?
So roasting is used when done properly to bring out the characteristics of the green coffee bean, right? An Ethiopian is going to be very different than a Sumatran. Sumatran is going to be very different from Peru. It's terroir. It's just like wine. And so we develop roast profiles to get the best out of the bean and its particular terroir. So when we roast, what you're really trying to do, at least, and I think this is the magic of our roast master and the other members here, is like a really good touch to let the energy of the bean do the work to develop the sugars and the oils naturally and gently, as opposed to really just pumping a lot of heat into it and then dropping the heat dramatically. Let the bean do the work. So when it's done right, even a dark roast should be a very clean, at least for us, should be a very clean cup of coffee, but smoky with some hints of what the terroir is. I'm a light coffee drinker. I love Colombian coffee, in particular from two co-ops, Fondo Paez, which is an indigenous co-op down in the Cordillera Central. Phenomenal people, and their coffee is just, it's like I do French press, and that's all I do. I can do it in my sleep. But so you're a French roast drinker, and just so you all can know how coffee is roasted, there's two points in the roast, two milestones, and this is really down and dirty. Something called first crack and second crack. So you drop the coffee into the roaster, and it's roasting, and time is elapsing, and temperature is climbing, and the bean temp is climbing, and it goes through first crack. And this is really basic version. So by the time the coffee gets through first crack, it's been dried, right? And it's popping. You can kind of hear it. Then it moves through to something called second crack. That's where the oils and sugars are really developing. Well, kind of right into first crack, second crack, you would get something called a full city. So if you drop the beans before that, you're getting a light roast, which is what I like. If you go up into second crack, you start to get to a full city, which is going to be patches of oil, not smoky, but definitely a little bit more of a robust taste, more of like a breakfast blend. Then you'll move a little bit further time and temperature, and you get to a Viennese, which is going to be slightly smoky. It's going to be more patchy with oil, and you're still going to be able to taste the coffee, but you're really getting kind of where the roast style is dominating. But by the time you get to French, it's smoky and it's dark, and a lot of people really like coffee that way. But no, I'm a light coffee drinker. I'm a light coffee.
Thanks. Is it more acidic when it's light?
So nominally, Nominally, acidity, in my opinion, it's pretty hard to really get a low acid coffee, and it's really where it's from and the type of processing. I believe, and I'm not really well versed in this, I think the Central Americans, I can double check. I think Central American coffees. But yeah, you know, as you roast a coffee a little bit longer, you should technically be roasting out some of the acidity. And if coffee is roasted well, the acidity should be an attribute, not a ulcer-producing event. And that's the beauty of small batch roasted organic coffee that's roasted properly.
Thanks.
Thank you. Hey, Steve.
Hi, Tripp. Thank you very much for that presentation. I'm certainly going to appreciate coffee a whole lot more when I drink it now. My question is, can you do like a French roast with any coffee bean, or a better French roast is to a particular region? And that's true of like Colombian roast. Do they always come from Colombia?
So to your first question, based on what our roaster Lee has taught me, you can dark roast any coffee. In fact, dark roasting is often used to mask defects. But from what I understand, bean density has a lot to do with a dark roast really being palatable, pleasant. So higher altitude coffees tend to be a little bit more of a dense bean. And so, for example, Colombia, which is a single origin, right, coffee, Colombia, we do French in Colombia, but we do a French roast in Nicaragua, which is a lower altitude coffee, and it comes out just fine. But yeah, I would say the harder, denser beans hold up to a dark roast maybe a little bit better. Lower altitude needs a little more nuance because the beans are just a little bit more delicate. I think Colombia, Peru are great dark roasts. Sumatra, if anybody likes a really wild kind of tobacco-y, tannin-y coffee, Sumatra is known as being a little wild in the cup because of inconsistencies of how they produce it, which is actually an attribute. Getting Sumatra in a Viennese roast is a good way to experience Sumatran coffee. But for Colombian, I would go with either a light or a French, the two extremes.
And then what about decaf, and how does that affect coffee?
So I had trouble understanding, so I'm going to give you my dumbed down process that somebody explained to me, somebody credible. So first of all, there is good organic decaf coffee, and it uses a natural water process. There's a patented version called, and trademarked as well, a Swiss water decaf. But natural water process is a great decaffeination process because traditional decaffeination methods, you can use solvents and other things that are just unhealthy and unnecessary. So here's how it was explained to me. So the natural water process a coffee, you take a perfectly good batch of green coffee beans and you dump them in a tank of water. The flavor and the caffeine migrate out of the coffee into the water, right? And the company that's decaffeinating, our coffee goes into Mexico, I think, is one of our primary decaffeination plants for our trading partners. So the caffeine is filtered out and sold. And then essentially, and this is like very just conceptual, the water remains flavor charged. So the caffeine's filtered out and sold, the water remains flavor charged. They take out the beans that have been basically sapped of all of their caffeine and flavor, and then they start the decaf process. So they'll take a batch to dump in. Because the water is flavor charged, it maintains equilibrium. So the flavor essentially remains intact, but because there is no caffeine in the water, the caffeine migrates out. So they let the caffeine migrate out and sell it. The water's flavor charged, so the decaf coffee of Peru, for example, basically retains its flavor profile with just a little bit of a hit on the flavor profile. They're not completely decaf, but they are organic, and they are much better for you than non-organic decaf. And I had decaf in a 1-to-3 ratio with my coffee today before coming for this. So it's got decent flavor.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Number 3.
Yes, ma'am.
Who buys the caffeine part?
Soda makers.
Oh, soda makers. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. From what I understand.
Good, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, you all.
Thank
Any
you.
more
Tripp.
questions at all? Tripp, fantastic. So interesting to learn about a field that we pay attention to every day. And basically, I, for one, knew very little about. So thank you. And
Well, thank you for letting me do this. I appreciate it. Appreciate you all. I really love being part of this Sangha, and I was really nervous about doing this because I know it's a smart group, but I hope this was helpful.
Well,
Very
it's-
thank you.
Cool.
Thank you.
So
All
good
right.
night,
It was
everyone.
great.
Well,
Thank you,
let's-
Tripp.
Thank you, Tripp. Thank you, everyone, of course.
Thank you.
Yeah, brilliant.
Good night.
So much.
Thank you so
Tripp.
much, Tripp. Good night.
Have a good night.
Good night, all.
Well done.
should we close with the dedication?
Oh, yeah.
The dedication.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Would you like to stop recording someone, please? Thank you.